The Mafia boss went to an elite clinic to see his fiancée and found his ex at reception with twin girls. Welcome back to Heartwoven Tales. I'm Selena. I hope you're all doing well today. Tell me, who's here with me? Ready to become a part of this beautiful family? I want to know. And while you're thinking about that, how would you rate the concept of my stories so far? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let's see those hearts in the comments. Today, I have a very powerful story for you, one that I created to explore love, sacrifice, and the ties that bind us in ways we never expect. It's full of tension, emotion, and unforgettable moments, and I promise you won't want to skip a single second. So, if you haven't yet, go ahead and subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story that touches your heart and keeps you on the edge of your seat. All right. Let's not wait any longer. Grab your seat, get comfortable, and let's dive in. Sam Billings entered the elite clinic without breaking stride, his presence bending the space around him in subtle ways he no longer noticed. People like him learned early how to move through the world without friction, how to occupy rooms as if they had already been claimed. The glass doors parted smoothly, the polished floor reflecting a distorted version of his figure, sharp lines softened by artificial light. The place smelled clean in a way that was deliberate rather than honest, a curated sterility meant to calm wealthy nerves. He registered none of it. His mind was upstairs, on a private floor, where Isabella lay recovering from a procedure so routine it barely deserved concern. He had scheduled meetings around it, timed his arrival precisely, already planning the evening that would follow. Everything was orderly. Everything was controlled. That was how his life worked. He was halfway across the lobby when something unfamiliar slowed him. Not fear, not instinct. Something quieter and more dangerous. Recognition without confirmation. His steps shortened, his attention drifting away from the invisible staff and muted conversations. At the reception desk stood a woman whose posture he knew too well. Shoulders slightly tense, as if bracing against a world that had never been kind to her. Her hair was pulled back with practical care, not vanity, exposing a face Sam had once memorized in poor lighting in quieter years. Juliana. The name surfaced before the logic caught up, before his mind could argue against it. The woman he had not seen since the night everything between them shattered. The woman he had convinced himself belonged to a past that could no longer touch him. Beside her stood two little girls. They were small enough that the reception counter rose above their heads, their bodies pressed close to Juliana's legs, fingers clutching her coat, with the desperate grip of children who did not fully trust public spaces, identical in a way that made the word unavoidable. Same dark hair cut unevenly, same cautious stillness, same wide eyes scanning the room as if measuring it for danger. Sam's breathing stalled, not because he chose it, but because his body had decided something was wrong before his mind was willing to admit it. The girls turned their heads almost in unison, curiosity drawing their gaze upward, and when their eyes met his, something inside his chest folded inward. The shape of their faces, the sharpness in their eyes. It was like looking at a reflection distorted by time. Juliana noticed him then. Color drained from her face so quickly it was almost imperceptible, a controlled collapse rather than a dramatic one. Her fingers tightened around a folder she had been holding, knuckles whitening, breath hitching just enough to betray her. She did not step back. She did not move forward. She simply froze, like someone who had just stumbled across a grave they had worked very hard to forget. Sam saw it all in fragments, the way one does during moments the brain refuses to process as a whole. Her fear was not theatrical. It was precise, familiar. The kind of fear that came from having prepared for a moment and still being unready when it arrived. His mind began doing what it always did when confronted with uncertainty, calculating. 5.5 years. That number surfaced immediately, clean and unforgiving. The night he had walked away convinced he was choosing survival over sentiment. He replayed it without meaning to, the argument sharp even now, the words said because pride demanded them. 5.5 years ago. His gaze dropped again to the children, their height, their proportions, the way they held themselves, old enough to be aware, young enough to still seek protection without shame. His chest tightened, not with panic, but with something colder. The numbers aligned too easily. His body reacted before his conscience could interfere. One of the girls shifted closer to her sister, leaning in as if seeking reassurance. Her voice was quiet, barely more than breath, but the words landed with surgical precision. "Mom? Is that him?" The sound of it cut through the lobby noise, slicing into Sam's focus with a sharpness no threat ever had. He did not move, did not speak. He felt suddenly exposed, like a man whose armor had been stripped without his consent. Juliana swallowed hard, her gaze flicking between Sam and the children, weighing decisions that should never have existed. The space between them felt charged, stretched thin by years of absence and unspoken truth. Around them, life continued with cruel indifference. A nurse called a name. A security guard shifted his weight. Somewhere, an elevator chimed. Sam was aware of all of it, and none of it at once. His world had narrowed to the reception desk, to a woman who looked like she was holding the past together with sheer will, to 2 children whose existence rearranged everything he thought he knew. He felt the familiar instinct to assert control rise within him, the urge to command the situation back into order. But this was different. This was not a negotiation or a hostile takeover. This was reality intruding where it did not belong. Juliana's eyes met his again, and in them he saw something worse than anger or accusation. He saw calculation layered over fear, the look of someone gauging escape routes that did not exist. Whatever story she had built, whatever careful structure she had constructed to keep this moment from happening, it had failed. Sam understood that much without a word exchanged. He did not yet know why she was here, why now, why in this place of all places. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Meetings like this did not happen by coincidence. Not in his world, not in hers. The timing was too precise, the damage too exact. As he stood there, suspended between recognition and denial, Sam Billings realized something fundamental had shifted beneath his feet. This was not a confrontation he could walk away from, not a past he could ignore into silence. Whatever game had brought Juliana and those children into his line of sight had been designed carefully, and he had stepped into it without warning. The clinic no longer felt sterile or safe. It felt staged. And for the first time in years, Sam understood that the moment he had just entered would not end when he left the building. This wasn't chance. It was a breach. 2. Sam did not rush the distance between himself and the reception desk. He let the silence stretch around him, aware of how quickly people learned to step out of his way, how space yielded before he demanded it. Every footstep felt deliberate, heavy in a way that had nothing to do with sound. He stopped just short of the counter, close enough that Juliana could no longer pretend he was a passing shadow, far enough that the children were not forced to retreat. His presence altered the balance of the room without him needing to say a word. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled to the point of coldness, stripped of emotion not because he felt none, but because he knew what emotion did to negotiations. He asked her why she was here. The question was simple, direct and intentionally narrow, as if the years between them did not exist. Juliana answered too fast, the way people did when they were afraid of silence. She said she was here for a consultation, her tone light, almost casual, but the lie collapsed under its own weight the moment it left her mouth. Her hands betrayed her immediately, fingers curling inward, trembling despite her effort to steady them against the smooth surface of the desk. Sam noticed everything without reacting. He had learned long ago that stillness unnerved people more than aggression. He did not challenge her explanation, did not raise his voice, did not correct her. Instead, his gaze shifted past her, settling on the twins with an intensity that made Juliana's shoulders tighten. The girls stood quietly, absorbing the tension with the unsettling awareness of children who had learned too early how to read adults. Sam took his time studying them, not out of cruelty, but because his mind demanded answers his heart was refusing to give. Their faces were open yet guarded, expressions serious beyond their age. He noted the symmetry between them, the way they mirrored each other's posture without realizing it, the faint crease between their brows that suggested concentration rather than fear. His chest tightened, not sharply, but with a slow, suffocating pressure. He had looked into mirrors his entire life without consequence. Seeing himself reflected back through them felt like trespassing. The calculations returned, this time without mercy. He forced himself to slow down, to reconstruct the timeline carefully instead of clinging to denial. 5.5 years ago. The night that had ended everything. The argument that had escalated beyond repair, fueled by pride, exhaustion, and the belief that walking away was cleaner than staying. He remembered how certain he had been, how convinced he was that cutting ties was an act of strength. The memory tasted bitter now. He looked at the twins again, measuring not just their age, but their presence, the weight they carried in the room. The numbers aligned too perfectly. The realization settled into him like something permanent. Sam leaned closer to Juliana, lowering his voice further, not out of intimidation, but because the truth did not need volume. He told her to stop lying. The words were calm, unadorned, impossible to misunderstand. Juliana's breath caught, and for a moment she looked like she might argue, might cling to the last fragments of the story she had built. Then something inside her gave way. Her composure didn't shatter dramatically, it eroded. Tears welled slowly, resisted stubbornly, and then spilled despite her effort to contain them. She looked away for half a second, as if ashamed of the weakness, then forced herself to meet his eyes again. She said she never planned for him to find out like this. Not here. Not now. The admission carried exhaustion rather than self-pity, the sound of someone who had been carrying a secret long past the point of endurance. Sam felt an unexpected surge of anger, not directed at her, but at the space between them that had allowed this reality to exist unnoticed. He had lived 5 years believing the past was sealed, while she had lived 5 years guarding something fragile and alive. When she spoke again, her voice fractured under the weight of what she was about to say. She told him she had been pregnant the night he walked away. The sentence was quiet. The impact was not. The words did not register immediately. Sam's mind stalled, refusing to accept them as fact. He searched her face for deception, for manipulation, for anything that would allow him to dismiss what he had just heard. He found none, only fear, only resolve, only the unmistakable look of someone who had prepared for disbelief and accepted it as inevitable. The twins shifted beside her, sensing the emotional shift even without understanding its cause. Their eyes lifted to him again, wide and silent, as if waiting for something they could not name. Sam felt something rupture inside his chest, not violently, but thoroughly. Juliana wiped at her face, frustration flickering beneath the tears. She said she hadn't planned to tell him today, hadn't intended for this moment to exist at all. Her body angled subtly toward the girls, protective without being obvious, an instinct honed through repetition rather than theory. Sam noticed the movement and felt a sharp pang of something unfamiliar. Not jealousy, but displacement. She had learned how to shield them without him. The realization carried a quiet humiliation. He had built an empire on the assumption that he was indispensable. This truth proved otherwise. The air around them felt heavier, the room shrinking as if the walls were listening. Sam was aware of the clinic continuing its rhythm, of staff moving deliberately, of voices murmuring at a distance. None of it reached him fully. His focus remained fixed on Juliana and the children, on the gravity of what had just been revealed. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. There was nothing he could say that would not fracture something further. The truth had already done its damage. Juliana inhaled slowly, as if preparing herself for one final blow. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier, edged with urgency. She told him there was more he needed to understand, that he wasn't the only one who knew anymore. The words carried weight beyond their meaning, a warning rather than a confession. Sam felt the shift instantly, the familiar tightening of instinct snapping into place. This was no longer just a personal reckoning. This was exposure. And someone else knows they're yours. The sentence settled between them like a loaded weapon. Sam's chest tightened with a weight he could not name. The words Juliana had just spoken lingered between them like a living thing, vibrating with consequences he had not anticipated. He looked at the twins again, the faint lines of worry etched on their small faces, and felt the raw force of disbelief. The world he had thought he controlled, the city, his empire, the calculated certainty of his own life, suddenly seemed fragile, porous, incapable of shielding what mattered. Juliana's eyes met his for a fraction of a second, and in them he saw the truth of what she had carried alone for years. It was not guilt, though guilt was there. It was the weight of absolute vigilance, of choices made under pressure so immense that no one else could understand them. She had survived, she had protected, and she had survived alone. Without a word, she led him away from the desk toward a quieter corner of the lobby where the hum of ordinary life could not penetrate. Sam followed, the twins clinging to her sides as if they were extensions of her body. Each step was deliberate, but the tension between them was palpable, stretching the space in ways no casual conversation could mitigate. The distant beeps of machines, the soft murmur of staff, even the faint scent of antiseptic seemed drowned out by the immediacy of this revelation. Juliana's grip on the girls was protective, almost defensive, her body positioned like a shield against a world he had never imagined. Sam's instincts wanted to command the space, to impose structure, but he felt hesitation, an unfamiliar weakness when faced with lives more vulnerable than any enemy he had ever faced. She began to speak, her voice low, cautious, but edged with a quiet resolve. Sam's attention was absolute, drawn into every fragment of her recollection. Days after he had walked away, the warnings had begun arriving at her doorstep. They came as letters at first, unsigned and ambiguous, then as phone calls with voices that carried authority without identification. Names that meant nothing to her at the time became symbols of danger she could feel in her bones, men whose reputation preceded them and whose threats were veiled in insinuation and subtle menace. She had learned quickly that these were not idle words. The world surrounding Sam was layered, intricate, and ruthless, and in that world, heirs did not live quietly. Not if anyone had the slightest interest in them. She realized immediately that her children were targets. Sam listened, the layers of his former life slowly grinding against the new reality. Rage, guilt, and fear collided within him like a violent storm. Rage at the injustice of it, at the manipulation of his absence. Guilt for leaving her alone, for underestimating the consequences of his choices. Fear, sharp and insistent, for the safety of the children he had never known existed. His hands clenched at his sides, not knowing whether to reach for her, to demand explanation, or to plan defense. He wanted to yell, to storm into the lobby and confront anyone who had dared touch his life. But he was paralyzed by the simultaneous necessity of understanding what had happened and ensuring no more immediate danger reached the twins. He could not act rashly. His mind, trained for command and strategy, now contended with a situation entirely unfamiliar. Juliana's explanation deepened, her story unfolding like a careful map of survival. She had disappeared, not as a reactionary measure, but as a calculated defense. Cities were changed, Names replaced, histories rewritten. Sam's existence was erased from every record that might betray her. Every trace of their former life together had been buried beneath layers of assumed identity. The twins had grown under this shield, unaware of the father they could not yet name, protected by a mother whose determination had transformed fear into methodical preservation. Sam's vision blurred slightly as he considered the implications. The years he had wasted thinking everything ended cleanly, the sacrifices she had endured without complaint, the quiet heroism that had allowed two small lives to flourish in the shadow of danger. He realized that for all his power, he had been powerless in a way he had never felt before. As he processed the scale of her sacrifices, a flicker of movement behind the reception desk caught his eye. A monitor glitched, the security feed flickering briefly as if hesitating to display reality. Sam's trained gaze recognized the anomaly immediately. The figure that appeared for just a split second on the screen was unmistakable, familiar in ways that made his stomach clench. Years of conflict, rivalry, and unfinished battles coalesced into a single recognition. This was no stranger, no casual observer. The shadowy face on the monitor belonged to his oldest, deadliest enemy, a man whose presence in this moment made the carefully constructed safety around the twins suddenly feel like a fragile illusion. Sam's pulse quickened, not from panic, but from the deep, instinctive awareness that the world he had thought he controlled had already anticipated his moves. Juliana noticed the subtle change in his posture, the narrowing of his gaze, and understood immediately without words. She could feel the same danger that Sam now saw, the same calculation that forced him to step back, to reassess everything in an instant. The twins sensed it too. One of them shifted, small hands gripping Juliana's coat more tightly, eyes scanning the edges of the room. Sam's jaw tightened. He realized with sudden clarity that the warnings she had obeyed for all these years had not been idle. They had been prescient. Whoever had been observing, whoever had set this trap or waited for this convergence, had not made a mistake, and they were closer than he had dared imagine. Sam's attention snapped back to Juliana, to the truth she had withheld not out of malice but necessity. He understood viscerally that her deception had been survival itself. She had not hidden the children from him out of spite. She had hidden them because the moment of revelation carried with it lethal consequences, and she had calculated those consequences with the same cold precision he now recognized in himself. Rage was tempered by respect. Guilt was tempered by recognition. Fear remained, sharp and uncompromising. He knew that the room, the lobby, the entire clinic could no longer be assumed safe. Every familiar surface was now potentially a stage for confrontation. The twins looked to him again, silently, their small faces unreadable, yet charged with expectation. Sam felt a sudden, crushing awareness of the stakes. These were not abstract threats. These were immediate, present, and they were directed toward lives that depended on his choices in ways he had never experienced before. Juliana's hand brushed briefly against his arm, a tentative reminder that she had been alone in this strategy for years. He felt a momentary surge of helplessness. All the calculated strategies, the control, the empire he had built were insufficient in this new terrain. Here, survival depended not on power or intimidation, but on vigilance, timing, and the ability to read danger before it arrived. Sam's mind raced, cataloging every detail, names, faces, dates, timelines, vulnerabilities. Every lesson he had learned from his enemies now applied to the protection of these innocent lives. The weight was staggering. He had spent his life preparing to protect an empire. He now had to protect the next generation without precedent, without rehearsal. And the realization was overwhelming. Someone was already watching. Someone knew the truth. Someone knew that the father of the twins had returned. The implications were immediate and chilling. He turned slowly toward the monitor again, trying to catch another glimpse, to freeze the image in memory, to analyze the threat before it could manifest. The flicker returned briefly, a shadow at the edges of vision, and then disappeared. The effect was more terrifying than a direct confrontation. It was an invisible awareness, the sense that they had already calculated his presence, already anticipated his reaction. He felt the subtle pull of strategy already in motion, the kind of threat that could not be bargained with or reasoned around. It was pure, precise, and relentless. Juliana's voice came softly, barely above the low hum of the lobby. She reminded him that the danger had been present from the moment the twins were born, that every move, every city, every identity change had been made to keep them alive. Sam absorbed the enormity of it. Her courage, the years of vigilance, the constant surveillance, all collided with his own perception of control. He realized that this confrontation was far from over. It had only just begun. And yet, for the first time in years, he saw clearly what mattered most. The twins, Juliana, survival, not pride, truth, not power. The lobby, with its polished floors and sterile light, had become a theater of strategy, calculation, and history, converging in a single silent instant. Sam understood that moving forward would require precision beyond instinct. Every step, every glance, every decision was now part of a web that had been spun long before his arrival. And in that web, one man's presence flickering briefly on a monitor reminded him of all he had yet to face. The realization settled like stone in his gut. Someone was here. Someone had been watching, and the world he thought he knew had changed irreversibly. Sam's pulse didn't race. Not yet. His mind, honed for years in the ruthless arithmetic of control, began cataloging variables, mapping possibilities, projecting outcomes with the precision of a general preparing for an unseen enemy. That brief flicker on the security monitor, the shadowy face he recognized instantly, settled into his consciousness like a cold weight. Enzo De Luca. The name carried years of calculated hostility, a personal vendetta that Sam had never allowed to touch the Empire directly, a thread always hovering just out of reach. Now that thread had grown into a net, laid here in the polished halls of the clinic, intended to catch him unaware. Juliana's revelation fell over him in layers, the silent acknowledgement of danger tightening the air between them. "She's been tracking the twins for weeks," Juliana whispered, her voice a mix of fear and controlled panic. Sam didn't flinch. He already knew the implications. Men had circled the city, their presence invisible but constant, leaving subtle signs for the alert to notice. Vehicles parked for hours in unlikely places, random observers whose patterns never quite added up. And all of it had been beneath Juliana's awareness. The realization struck him cold. Even the people he trusted indirectly had been blindsided. The doctor at this clinic, chosen for its security and discretion, had become the mistake that exposed everything. Sam's eyes flicked to the elevators, the stairwells, the polished floors that now seemed too shiny, too hollow, a trap waiting in sterile silence. Upstairs, Isabella was alone. Sam felt a spike of anger and protective instinct simultaneously. She was unaware that her routine recovery had been twisted into a theater of control, that the familiar corridors she trusted were part of a design that could endanger her. The calculated calm he had carried through life dissolved, replaced by a focus narrowed to survival and extraction. He could not reach her immediately. The floors above were out of his immediate line of sight. Security personnel moved reactively, uncoordinated, scrambling too late to anticipate the depth of the trap. Sam realized the full extent of Enzo's strategy. It wasn't about revenge in the simple sense. Revenge had been the bait, leverage was the objective. The clinic, the fiancé, the children, all elements in a network of control meant to force him into a corner he had never occupied before. Suddenly, the lights flickered. the first sign that the environment itself was being weaponized. Not mechanical failure, but deliberate interference. Sam felt the subtle shift in atmosphere, the tactile tension that comes when every surface you see could conceal a threat. His ears caught a subtle vibration through the flooring, one he had trained himself to notice through countless confrontations. Then came the sound that stripped any pretense of normality from the lobby. The emergency doors sealed shut with a mechanical finality, a heavy metallic snap that reverberated through the walls. Panic rippled through patients and staff alike, but Sam's gaze never wavered. He assessed escape routes, emergency exits, and vulnerabilities instinctively, while the twins instinctively leaned closer to Juliana. Their small hands gripped the folds of her clothing like anchors, unaware, but perfectly attuned to the escalating danger. A piercing fire alarm cut through the sterile air, a shrill scream that fractured the controlled calm of the clinic. Patients began to shout, some crying, others moving instinctively toward doors that no longer opened. Security scrambled, rushing without coordination, their gestures reactive rather than tactical. Sam absorbed the chaos without surprise. It was the expected response to controlled disruption. His mind cataloged the anomalies, the sudden door locks, the precise timing of the alarm, the calculated panic among civilians. Everything screamed orchestration. Nothing was random. Every element pointed to a hand guiding the unfolding scene, and that hand was already familiar to him. Sam's gaze returned to Juliana and the twins. The children were wide-eyed now, gripping her arms with quiet desperation, absorbing the environment with an instinctive awareness of danger. Juliana's face was pale but determined, her mind racing through survival options she had prepared silently for years. Sam saw the coordination in her posture, the protective strategies unconsciously enacted, the mental map of the space she had memorized to shield them from unseen threats. Even in the chaos, she was methodical, but the unpredictability of the enemy had escalated the stakes to a level where instinct alone would not suffice. Sam had to act. Now. Then the voice came. It was low, calm, deliberate, echoing through the clinic's intercom system, suffused with a confidence that chilled even Sam's seasoned composure. "Welcome, Sam," it said, the tone measured as if savoring the exact impact of each word. It carried familiarity, the cruel intimacy of someone who had planned every variable meticulously. The voice confirmed his suspicion, solidifying the understanding that Enzo De Luca was not content with mere observation. He intended to manipulate, to pressure, to trap. Sam felt the subtle tremor of a calculated trap snapping into place, the kind that required immediate recognition and strategic counteraction. The lobby around him became a stage of controlled chaos. Staff tried to lead patients toward exits, but the mechanical locks resisted, trapping movement like threads pulling people into a design Sam now understood as maliciously intentional. The sound of footsteps, hurried and uneven, created layers of auditory tension. Each noise was a potential threat or misdirection. Sam noted every detail, recognizing the manipulation of space as a weapon. Lights flickered again, this time in unpredictable sequences, shadows stretching across the floor with sinister effect. Each pulse of darkness carried potential danger. Sam moved slowly, every muscle tuned, aware that one misstep could allow Enzo's orchestration to succeed. Juliana pressed the twins close, whispering instructions in soft tones they could understand without fully knowing the danger. Sam observed the quiet coordination, the interplay of survival instinct and parental intuition. Every reaction had purpose. No gesture was wasted. And still, he could feel the trap closing, not just physically, but strategically. Enzo had studied his habits, anticipated his decisions, and engineered a situation where the cost of action or inaction was immediate. Sam's awareness expanded, tracking the environment, the panic, the glitches in the monitors. the flickers of human behavior reacting to contrived chaos. Every detail fed into the calculus of survival he had trained for his entire life. Then the intercom spoke again, a faint pause followed by words aimed directly at the center of his awareness. "Do you see how fragile control can be, Sam? Every step you take is already accounted for, every movement calculated, every choice has a price." The voice carried malice without need of volume, strategy without overt threat. It confirmed everything he feared and anticipated simultaneously. Sam's chest tightened. The twins whimpered softly, sensing the gravity of the words, even if they could not comprehend their meaning. Juliana glanced at him, silently acknowledging that escape, strategy, and reaction had all become inseparable in this environment. Sam shifted his attention methodically to exits, staff, and vulnerable points, his mind racing through contingencies. Every potential path for survival, extraction, or confrontation had already been constrained by the trap. His instincts screamed that Enzo's game was multi-layered, that leverage was the ultimate objective, and that his decisions in the next few seconds could ripple irreversibly through all lives present. The emergency doors sealed, the alarms screamed, the lights flickered, and the voice through the intercom was constant, deliberate, a tether linking the chaos to a single hand. Sam felt the magnitude of the strategy pressing down like gravity, pulling him into action with urgency he had never before experienced in a controlled environment. The lobby felt smaller, the polished surfaces reflecting shadows that seemed alive with anticipation. Patients stumbled, security attempted coordination, but the trap had anticipated their every move. The twins clung to Juliana as though instinct alone could counteract orchestration, and Sam realized that instinct would not suffice. Strategy, clarity, and decisive action were the only tools left. He understood finally with chilling precision that this was not about punishment, revenge, or past grievances. Enzo's purpose was leverage, to force choices that would either fracture his empire, endanger those he loved, or force him into surrender. Every flicker of light, every locked door, every shiver of human response became a variable Sam could no longer ignore. The intercom's final echo for this moment, calm and precise, sealed the reality. "Welcome to the game, Sam. You can't win by instinct alone." The trap was fully revealed. Smoke began to creep through the lobby like a living thing, curling along the polished floors, filling the sterile air with the acrid tang of chaos. Sam's senses snapped to overdrive, muscles coiling as instinct replaced calculation. The faint hiss of flames, almost imperceptible above the alarm, mingled with the scent of fear and burning electronics, creating a pressure in the room that made each heartbeat feel doubled. He could see Enzo's men moving with deliberate precision, emerging from service corridors that had once been unnoticed, now revealing themselves as conduits for the trap. Their formation was disciplined but silent, their shadows stretching long across the walls as if to claim the space before anyone could react. Sam's attention immediately shifted to the twins. Without hesitation, he scooped them up, feeling their small bodies press against his chest. They fit against him with a natural closeness, the kind that erased formalities, strategy, and past distance. One of the girls instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck, pressing her face into his shoulder. The words she whispered cut through every calculation, every plan, and every trained instinct he had relied upon for decades. Dad. It was quiet, hesitant, innocent, but it triggered something irreparable deep inside him. His body tightened, his chest ached with an unfamiliar surge of responsibility. No enemy, no ambush, no empire had ever delivered such a raw, undeniable demand. It wasn't about loyalty or control anymore. It was about life itself, fragile and screaming for protection. Juliana's scream tore through the smoke, splitting his focus. "Isabella! She's still upstairs!" Sam froze mid-step, a paralysis of urgency and impossibility. Two lives pulled him in opposite directions with equal force, and for the first time, he could not calculate a path that protected both without compromise. The Empire had taught him sacrifice, but always on the terms of business, always abstract and distant. Never like this. Never when the stakes were the lives of those he had learned to love in fragments, hidden in the shadows of absence. His mind raced, eyes scanning corridors, stairwells, elevators, exit doors, and smoke-filled hallways for a way to bridge impossibility. Gunshots echoed, sharp and measured, bouncing off marble and glass. The sound punctuated the smoke like punctuation in a chaotic sentence. Each report, a countdown closer to irrevocable loss. Enzo's laughter erupted from the intercom, low and cruel, carrying the satisfaction of a predator watching prey scramble. Sam understood immediately. This was not just assault. This was psychological warfare. Delay, exposure, forced calculation, all orchestrated to destabilize, to extract mistakes, to weaken resolve. Every second now carried weight, multiplied by threat, each heartbeat a potential pivot point between salvation and catastrophe. He shifted, half crouching, instincts guiding him to shield the twins, while simultaneously scanning for the fastest route upstairs. Smoke stung his eyes, filling the space with a tactile pressure that made each movement laborious. Staff and patients panicked, their motions haphazard, further complicating the environment. Sam noted every detail, the angle of debris, the trajectory of smoke, the paths of armed men, allowing perception to substitute for his temporarily frozen resolve. Every element of chaos was a variable to control, even as the moral equation expanded beyond anything he had faced before. Juliana's voice cut in again, frantic yet precise, offering fragmented information. Isabella was conscious, restrained by a setup that was sophisticated and merciless. Sam registered the words and felt an icy tremor run through him. He could not ignore either danger, yet both demanded immediate action. His mind split into micro-strategies, weighing speed versus protection, improvisation versus premeditation. Decisions that normally came with time and calculation now required instantaneous clarity, where a fraction of a second could mean survival or death. Enzo's men moved methodically through the smoke. Their presence was unnerving because it was both visible and invisible. The angles they approached from were deceptive, the sounds of their steps and weaponry precise, calculated, almost silent. Sam adjusted his grip on the twins, noticing the subtle tremor in their bodies despite his shielding. Their awareness of threat, instinctive and unspoken, reinforced the stakes. He could no longer act in isolation. Every motion required anticipation of multiple consequences simultaneously. The fire alarm shrieked, distorted by smoke and reverberation, amplifying the panic. Patients stumbled into each other, screams overlapping, and Sam's trained eyes cataloged every obstacle. A fallen chair, a loose trash bin, a panicked adult pressing forward, they all became both hazard and opportunity. He moved through the chaos with methodical precision, each step a negotiation between instinct and calculation. The twins' small hands clung to his coat, fingers gripping as though tethering him to reality, to humanity. He realized then that the emotional tether was stronger than any tactical advantage, more binding than any threat Enzo could wield. Another crack of gunfire rang out closer this time, ricocheting off walls. Sam flinched, but did not let go of the children. The sound was a reminder of immediate danger, sharpening his senses into a pinpoint focus. He could hear the faint shuffle of boots behind service panels, the hiss of smoke escaping through vents, and the sporadic panic in distant hallways. Each sound was a layer of threat he had to mentally map and neutralize, while protecting what he now understood was the most fragile part of his life. He glanced at Juliana, who was providing guidance to the children with soft, urgent whispers. Her coordination was instinctive, seamless, yet no shield was perfect. Sam realized that every microsecond of indecision could be lethal. His entire life had prepared him for threats to himself, his empire, but never for threats that required the simultaneous protection of two innocent lives, while another equally critical life was in immediate danger. The calculation of sacrifice had never been so personal. Enzo's laughter erupted again, low and deliberate, weaving into the chaos of the smoke and alarms. The sound was a psychological blade, meant to divide attention, induce hesitation. Sam recognized the tactic, yet instinct overrode hesitation. He adjusted his stance, moving carefully yet urgently, seeking a path to both shield and counteract. The twins whispered reassurances. Small attempts at calm were drowned by chaos, yet they tethered him emotionally in ways that no experience, no training, could replicate. Through the haze, he saw the first of Enzo's men approaching from the left service corridor, weapons trained and disciplined. Sam's grip tightened on the children, body angled defensively. He analyzed trajectory, timing and positioning within the environment, already calculating the microseconds between steps, the seconds before escalation. He noted that the smoke distorted vision in predictable ways, shadows elongated unnaturally, reflections fractured on polished surfaces. Every environmental factor was a variable in the life or death equation he now faced. Juliana screamed again, the sound cutting through the smoke. Isabella was restrained, unable to move freely. Sam froze for a heartbeat, the moral and strategic conflict converging in his mind. Two lives demanded instant protection, yet only one path seemed partially open to immediate intervention. The others were potential death traps. Gunfire cracked again, closer. The walls and floors seemed alive with threat. The twins whimpered softly against him, whispering his name unintentionally, reinforcing the immediacy of the stakes. Enzo's voice returned, calm, deliberate, omnipresent. "Decide, Sam. Every choice has consequences." The words were simple, yet carried the weight of orchestration, strategy, and lethal foresight. Sam's mind processed the challenge instantly, not as rhetoric, but as a directive. Every motion he made from this point onward would determine outcomes that could not be undone. His life, the children, Juliana, Isabella, all were bound to microseconds of decision, precision, and instinct. The lobby now felt like a labyrinth, smoke curling like serpents, footsteps echoing from service corridors, gunfire punctuating the air, alarms distorting perception. Sam adjusted his grip, pivoted toward a potential exit, then back toward the center of chaos. Every step required prediction, anticipation, and moral calculus. Each sound was a new layer of threat. Each movement by Enzo's men altered the balance. Each cry or whimper reminded him that hesitation was not an option. The twins buried their faces against him instinctively. Sam felt the word "dad" echoing through his body, reshaping priorities in an instant. Instinct demanded shielding. Experience demanded assessment. Strategy demanded rapid decision-making. Every muscle tensed in readiness. Every eye scanned. Every ear strained. The room compressed into variables, all centered on his responses. And yet, despite the chaos, one thing was clear. Enzo's order had shifted. His men were advancing on the children. Sam's stomach clenched. He had seconds. Every second could alter the outcome. The children, Juliana, Isabella, the lobby, the smoke, the gunfire, the alarm, everything pressed in, demanding immediate, flawless action. His eyes darted, muscles coiled, mind racing through contingency after contingency. The realization was inescapable. Enzo's leverage had reached its apex. He was being forced into a position no strategy had prepared him for. And then, a command from the speakers. The next wave of men was advancing toward the twins, deliberate, measured, lethal. Sam's focus narrowed. Instincts and calculation converged. He could see every angle, every threat, every potential path. Every choice was finite. and every outcome had consequences that would resonate far beyond this lobby, far beyond this moment. The trap had become physical. The smoke had become suffocating, the echoes of gunfire relentless, and Sam Billings, for the first time in a long life of control and power, felt the weight of absolute vulnerability as the enemy closed in. The lobby felt smaller than it had moments ago, though the smoke and chaos had intensified, not diminished. Sam's senses had sharpened to a blade-like precision. Every flicker of movement, every hiss of smoke, every tremor of a footstep became data, feeding the rapid calculus of survival. He knew he could not remain static. The twins' small bodies pressed against him, their grip tightening as they sensed his tension, their energy both fragile and insistently alive. He could feel the weight of their trust pressing into him, a responsibility that rendered every past battle trivial by comparison. Here, there were no contingencies, no backup plans that mattered. Only this moment, only this choice. He pivoted, eyes scanning the smoke-filled lobby and adjoining service corridors. With brutal efficiency, Sam split his resources. Half of his immediate force, trained and loyal to the point of instinct, he directed with concise gestures to navigate the chaos upstairs and extract Isabella from her precarious situation. The clarity of command was mechanical, deliberate, almost cold, but inside, a furnace of tension burned. The other half of his focus remained entirely on the twins, on shielding them from advancing threats that were both visible and unseen. He could not abandon them, could not allow fear to dictate his actions. Every decision had to be measured, instantaneous, and lethal if necessary. For the first time in his life, Sam stood before a situation he could not fully control. Even his years of building an empire, enforcing loyalty, manipulating outcomes, and commanding obedience had not prepared him for the visceral, immediate vulnerability of holding the lives of 2 children against the precision of trained killers. He could anticipate, strategize, counteract, and yet there was no absolute certainty. Every instinct screamed that a single misstep could cost the twins' lives. The clarity of danger was total. The immediacy of moral stakes left no room for hesitation. Juliana's presence at his side was a steadying force. Her eyes met his briefly, and in that glance was the quiet confession of decades of protective instinct. She had never stopped loving him, yet her love for the children had always come first. Sam felt the subtle tremor in her posture, the way her shoulders squared not for herself, but for them. He recognized the choices she had made, the sacrifices, the hidden vigilance that had shielded them. He could not reproach her fully. The children's survival was absolute proof of her judgment. And yet, a part of him burned with rage that she had hidden the truth so long. It was a simultaneous mixture of admiration, frustration, and regret. Footsteps thundered from the underground levels, approaching with an inevitability that made the very air tremble. Sam recognized them before he saw the man behind them. Enzo De Luca emerged, moving with the calm precision of a predator who knew he had cornered his prey. He did not aim at Sam. No, he understood the stakes perfectly. His weapon leveled directly at the children, small, innocent targets whose lives were leverage, whose fear would fracture the father's resolve. Sam's grip on the twins tightened, heart hammering against ribs with a weight he had never before experienced. His mind cataloged trajectories, distances, angles, but none of it could eliminate the moral impossibility before him. He lowered his weapon slowly, deliberately, signaling to Enzo that he would not respond with immediate violence. The decision was instinctual, unavoidable, yet terrifying. Protect the children first. Sacrifice control. Trust judgment. Every muscle, every nerve in his body screamed for action. But action could not supersede strategy in this moment. The silence that followed was electric, charged with anticipation. Even the sound of their breathing became amplified. The twins pressed into him, small bodies trembling with awareness of danger they could not articulate, their eyes wide and bright despite the smoke and fear. Enzo's smile was subtle, predatory. He believed the psychological edge was his. He had anticipated compliance, hesitation, moral paralysis. The world had simplified into binary choices, and he assumed Sam would falter, would be forced into submission by the sheer impossibility of preserving both lives simultaneously. But he had misjudged Sam's instincts, misjudged the depth of resolve that had been tempered by years of ruthlessness and experience. Sam's awareness of every microsecond, every environmental variable, every potential distraction was now applied not to control, but to protection. Juliana whispered under her breath, small words meant to steady the twins, meant to reinforce the invisible shield of parent and protector. Sam felt the subtle weight of her decision-making, her trained mind now acting in tandem with his own instincts. The balance of power shifted imperceptibly, yet decisively, as they created a living fortress around the children. Smoke, chaos, footsteps, and gunfire formed the backdrop, but the immediate field of protection was calculated, precise, and ready. Sam's perception expanded, including every shadow, every reflection, every slight movement in his field of vision. The twins' whispered murmurs, small, fragile sounds, tethered Sam to purpose. Each breath they took, each pulse against his chest, reinforced the singular focus: survival, protection, immediate preservation of life above all else. The gun in Enzo's hands did not waver, yet Sam's focus had shifted, analyzing angles, anticipating timing, preparing for contingencies beyond instinct. His every movement, slight pivot, adjusted stance, and subtle repositioning became a choreography of survival and defense. A deafening silence settled briefly. The air felt suspended, every second stretching into eternity. Then the crack of a gunshot pierced the stillness. Not from Sam, not from Enzo. It rang through the underground corridor, a sound that froze movement, stopped breath, and recalibrated the tension in an instant. Sam's mind exploded into rapid processing. Trajectory, distance, threat, elimination, reassessment. The smoke seemed to hold its breath with him. The twins flinched, pressed closer to Juliana, and Sam instinctively moved to shield them further. The room became a compressed space of anticipation. Every second was a pivot, every motion potentially catastrophic, every micro-decision a determinant of life or death. Enzo's smile faltered, just slightly, as the unexpected interruption disrupted his calculated advantage. Sam's senses flared. He recognized the unanticipated variable as a critical opportunity. Every muscle, nerve, and instinct now synchronized in a singular rhythm. Protect the children. Respond to the threat. Assess consequences. Juliana's voice, low and precise, reminded him that there was no room for error. Sam absorbed it, letting it guide subtle micro-adjustments in stance and positioning. The twins' small hands clutched at him, their unspoken trust anchoring his focus, sharpening his awareness. Gunfire, smoke, footsteps, alarms, reflections, shadows, all merged into a single field of hyper-awareness, one he navigated instinctively, with brutal clarity and tactical precision. Sam's eyes swept the environment, registering every obstacle, every potential trajectory of attack, every microsecond of incoming danger. The children were the center of this universe. Every calculation, every risk, every movement revolved around them. Enzo's weapon still aimed, controlled, precise, but now his leverage was fractured by the unpredictability of variables he had not anticipated. Sam's mind cataloged this as a fleeting opportunity, a microsecond of imbalance in a meticulously calculated setup. Another flash of movement, a subtle shadow behind a column, barely noticeable in the smoke, confirmed Sam's awareness that the situation was now multidimensional. He could not act recklessly. Every motion had to be deliberate, timed, and responsive. The twins pressed into him instinctively, their small energy merging with his own, creating a shared focus, a living shield reinforced by instinct and vigilance. Breath became conscious, heartbeat measured, muscles coiled and uncoiled in rhythmic tension. Sam felt the absolute immediacy of moral responsibility, the gravity of paternal instinct, and the critical weight of the decisions demanded by the unfolding chaos. The space compressed into a point of potential catastrophe and opportunity, with Enzo at its center, weapon leveled, expectation heavy, and yet vulnerable to disruption. And then, before Sam could act, the gunshot had already rewritten the calculus. The room froze in suspended anticipation. The smoke, the chaos, the footsteps, the alarms, all became a backdrop to the singular, irreversible pivot of this moment. One shot, precise, unanticipated, and yet perfectly timed. Sam's gaze shifted toward the source, the twins clinging, Juliana ready, and the impossible balance of protection and action pressing down with full force. He knew the confrontation had escalated beyond instinct, beyond calculation. A father's decision, a protector's clarity, a warrior's timing, all now collided in a single, charged instant. The gunshot tore through the underground level with the suddenness of lightning, reverberating against walls, echoing through smoke and steel, and cutting the tension in the air like a knife. Sam barely had time to register the trajectory before he realized it had not come from him nor from Enzo. The recoil of shock ran through the space, freezing motion in the immediate aftermath. Enzo, who had been poised, predatory, calculating, flinched just for a fraction of a heartbeat, a fraction enough to expose his vulnerability. Juliana had acted with instinct, precision, and an unspoken courage that Sam hadn't anticipated. The sound of the shot rolled through the lobby, through the corridors, and into the consciousness of everyone trapped there, creating a suspended moment that seemed to last an eternity. Sam's body reacted immediately, the twins clinging to him, small but urgent, pressing their weight against his chest. He felt their tiny hearts hammering, vibrating in rhythm with his own, as adrenaline surged through veins that had trained for conflict, but not this precise, this personal. Smoke still curled through the air, thick and acrid, yet the immediate danger had fractured, just enough for Sam to register the shift in momentum. The world became hyper-focused, filtered through sensory overdrive. The echo of the gunshot, the staccato breathing of the children, the subtle vibration of the building as sirens began to pierce the distance. Juliana's movements were quick, controlled, yet tremulous with the residual tension of instantaneous violence. She held the gun now loosely at her side, awareness still scanning, calculating the room, the angles, the potential for retaliation. Sam realized that her courage had been more than instinct. It was a lifetime of protective vigilance compressed into one decisive act. The twins had not yet fully understood what had happened, but their grip on him tightened. A reflexive acknowledgement of danger neutralized, and trust fully placed in their father and Juliana. Outside the underground corridors, the wail of sirens grew louder, a sound that sliced through chaos and brought with it the inevitability of law, order, and external scrutiny. Police officers swarmed the building, their boots heavy on marble floors, their radios crackling with fragmented commands, and their presence imposing both relief and renewed tension. The contrast between the organized intrusion of law enforcement and the chaos that had consumed the lobby moments before heightened the surreal quality of the moment. Sam absorbed it all with the acute clarity of someone still processing the immediacy of survival while anticipating residual threats. The smoke lingered, curling along edges and stairwells, and the scattered debris from overturned chairs, knocked displays, and abandoned bags formed obstacles in a once pristine lobby. The smell of burnt wiring mingled with cleaning agents, a surreal combination that made the space feel suspended between reality and nightmare. Sam moved carefully, the the twins' bodies pressed into his chest, feeling every subtle shift in their posture, every shiver, every instinctive response to the environment. The weight of responsibility pressed into him physically as much as mentally. Isabella emerged from the stairwell, her movements deliberate, cautious, yet unharmed. Her eyes widened as she took in the remnants of chaos and the tableau she had never imagined witnessing. The smoke, the shattered sense of calm, the human tension etched across Sam's face, and the presence of Juliana holding her ground created a scene impossible to ignore. Sam felt the full weight of exposure, his two worlds intersecting violently in a moment that could not be undone. The truth sat heavy, like a stone pressing into the center of the room, undeniable and irreversible. Sam lowered himself slightly, maintaining the twins' proximity, absorbing their heat, their smallness, their fragility against his torso. Each breath he drew synchronized with their shallow, panicked intakes of air. He felt the pulse of life against him, the raw, physical manifestation of everything he had fought to protect. This was no longer about territory, control, or strategy. It was about survival, about human connection, about a primal instinct that surpassed all calculation. Every second he held them felt like both eternity and a fleeting heartbeat. Juliana's eyes met his briefly, an unspoken acknowledgement of everything that had led to this point. Her gaze was firm, unwavering, yet tinged with residual fear and exhaustion. Sam could read the layers: relief that the immediate threat was neutralized, lingering fear of the unseen, and deep, unshakable commitment to the children's survival. The twins adjusted slightly in his arms, their small hands clutching at his suit, their eyes wide, scanning, absorbing the after-effects of violence they could barely comprehend. Outside, the sirens intensified, blending with the persistent hum of ventilation and the crackling residual fires from the smoke-filled lower levels. Officers called out, establishing perimeters, directing civilians, and beginning to catalog the chaotic scene. Sam's mind calculated contingencies even as the immediate threat had been neutralized. The past, present, and potential futures interwove, layering judgment, calculation, and instinct into a seamless, continuous flow. He felt the subtle tremor in the building, residual vibrations from gunfire and chaos, and instinctively adjusted his grip, reinforcing the protective cocoon around the children. The lobby, once a space of sterile elegance, now bore the marks of violence, panic, and human fear. Broken glass reflected distorted images of bodies and movement, a fractured mirror of the chaos that had erupted. Sam's attention remained anchored to the twins. All else became peripheral, noted but secondary. Isabella took hesitant steps forward, observing Sam and the children, her expression a mixture of relief and shock. Her movements were careful, as if stepping into a space that had been violently rewritten overnight. Sam's gaze met hers, and in that silent exchange, unspoken understanding flowed. The lives of the children had shifted every axis of loyalty, strategy, and expectation. Nothing would be the same. The boundaries of past, present, and future had been irrevocably altered. Sam began to move toward the exit, each step deliberate, maintaining balance amid residual debris, smoke, and the heightened awareness of potential threats. The twins nestled into his chest, breathing shallowly, their trust absolute. The world outside loomed as both sanctuary and uncertainty. The moral calculus he had performed for decades, decisions of loyalty, empire, and control, was now eclipsed entirely by the singular objective of survival for the innocent. The air outside the stairwell carried fresh oxygen, a tangible relief from the suffocating smoke-filled corridors below. The transition from chaos to relative calm was disorienting, a sudden shift that made Sam acutely aware of the fragility of life, the violence narrowly avoided, and the invisible threads that had governed their survival. Each step he took carried the weight of responsibility, each breath a reminder that danger could return in an instant. He finally emerged into the first glimmer of dawn, the soft pale light cutting across the wreckage of the clinic's entrance. The world outside felt both familiar and irreparably changed. Sam held the twins tightly, their small bodies adjusting to the light, their faces still pressed into him. Every heartbeat reminded him that the cost of survival was not measured in victories or territory, but in the fragile, irreplaceable lives he now bore responsibility for. Sam's phone vibrated against his hip, a single intrusion into a moment otherwise consumed by aftermath. He drew it out cautiously, aware that danger could linger even in communication. The screen displayed a single message from an unknown number. "You saved them today, Father. Let's see how long you can keep them." The words hit with the weight of inevitability. The future, once open to empire, power, and control, now carried the unshakable burden of protection, vigilance, and unending responsibility. Sam's jaw tightened. The dawn stretched ahead, uncertain, dangerous, but resolute. The children in his arms, Juliana beside him, and the fragile remnants of his old life left behind defined a new axis of survival, one where love, instinct, and violence converged, irrevocably reshaping everything he had known. Sam looked down at the twins, then at Juliana, then into the rising sun, and the quiet realization settled in. Nothing in his life would ever be the same. Not the city, not his empire, not his identity. The cost of survival had been paid in fire, smoke, bullets, and irrevocable truth. And yet, for the first time in a long time, Sam understood that he would endure, because now every decision, every action, every heartbeat belonged to them. The wind of early morning swept across the ruined clinic entrance. Sirens faded to background noise. The twins' breaths grew more even, and Sam allowed a brief, almost imperceptible exhale. But the message lingered, a whisper of challenges to come, of unseen adversaries, of consequences waiting beyond the horizon. He had survived the moment, but survival was only the beginning. And with that, Sam Billings, father, protector, and survivor, stepped forward into a future reshaped by love, loss, and the unyielding demands of blood over everything. Wow, what an intense journey that was. Thank you for staying with me till the very end of this powerful story. I want to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Which moment hit you the hardest? Drop your thoughts in the comments because your voice matters in our Heartwoven Tales family. If you felt the emotions, if you loved the twists, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another story that will touch your heart and keep you on the edge of your seat. And remember, every story here is crafted for you to make you feel, reflect, and sometimes even cry. Until next time, stay close, stay inspired, and keep your hearts woven.